fallout, the quiet history of New Vegas. Chapter 1. Before the Neon. If you are listening, let the room grow dim and quiet. Imagine the Mojave at night, a long, slow breath of warm air over sleeping stone. Somewhere ahead, a crown of light trembles against the dark, the Strip, like a mirage that refused to fade with the day. The desert hums with insects and old power lines, and the stars hang over it all, stubborn and watchful. We will walk slowly. We will not hurry the past. New Vegas does not reward haste. It rewards attention. Long before the chipped poker chips and the sharp suits, before the trumpet of Securitrons along the boulevard, there was a city in the desert called Las Vegas. It sold an old dream, luck for sale by the night, fortunes tallied by dawn. Neon was its banner, and water, pulled and parceled from the Colorado, was its quiet miracle. People built towers as if sand could hold anything forever. It could not, of course, but for a time it held enough. Then came October 23rd, 2077, when the world's clocks struck the same hour and agreed to break. The Great War lasted hours. Its echo has lasted centuries. Many cities died loudly. Las Vegas was different. The city did not vanish in fire. It flinched. High above the Strip, in a fortress of glass and copper called the Lucky 38, a man who had been preparing longer than anyone else watched the sky and reached for tools he had built to turn catastrophe aside. Robert House, Mr. House to those who still speak of him with a careful note in the voice, was a pre-war titan, an engineer and a gambler, the sort who trusts both calculus and instinct. He believed Las Vegas could survive what the world would do to it, and so he tried to make it so. The records are contradictory, as all old records are. Some say he intercepted most of the missiles destined for the valley. Others say more than most. What matters is this: the city did not burn as others did. The Strip's towers staggered and cracked. The streets filled with dust and silence. The lights went out. But the bones of the city remained upright. Mr. House himself was not so fortunate. He disappeared from public life, sealed within the Lucky 38, a lighthouse with no keeper on its balcony. He would, much later, speak again. For a long time, there was only the hush. In the quiet after the fire, people did what they always do. They looked for shade, for water, for a place to sleep without dying. Some came from vaults, those deliberate burrows of the old world. One such vault, number 21, laid its halls beneath the Strip itself, a warren of fair games and honest odds once upon a time, later emptied, carved and gentled into hotel rooms. Others came from farther afield, caravan hands following dry riverbeds, scavengers with pockets full of bent screws, families who had learned to pack a life onto a cart. Many passed by the valley, wary of the sudden skeletons of towers. But some stayed, as people always have, drawn to the promise that ruins mean materials, and materials mean shelter, and shelter means a chance. First, there were scavengers and squatters. Then, there were camps. Camps hardened into neighborhoods when they last long enough. Westside grew from gardens bordered by scrap fencing and hope, irrigated by pipes that were older than the oldest resident and moody as cats. North Vegas gathered welders and knife fighters and anyone who trusted steel more than talk. Freeside, laid right up against the strip's fence, became the messy antechamber where the broke and the bold waited their turn to flirt with riches. Between every block, you could find the quiet arithmetic of survival, where the nearest water was, how many steps to the clinic, whether the talk from the east was only talk. For a while, the strip slept. When it woke all at once. Mr. House returned to the conversation of the living, though not as a man who walked the boulevards. He spoke through screens, behind a stylized face, a gentleman's smile fixed at just the right angle, and through the hands of machines. Securitrons rolled in file, heavy and wide, their voices courteous, their programming anything but gentle. They patrolled the gates, stood like bronze statues at every casino entrance, and kept a promise. Within the fence, violence would answer to the house, not the offended. But casinos need more than rules to draw a crowd. They need spectacle and personality, perfumes that differ enough to pull different lovers to the same dance floor. Mr. House understood spectacle. He chose 3 tribes from the Mojave, taught them to shed their rough leathers for tuxedos and evening gowns, taught them table manners and the art of a smile that shows just enough tooth. He made deals with each, and thereby made them into the 3 families. At the tops, the chairman learned to play cool. They dressed old Vegas sharp, swaggering like kings of the lounge. And if you sat long enough, you could believe, for a moment, that the calendar could be tricked into turning backward. The tops was laughter in a glass, velvet over concrete, and an invitation you should never mistake for affection. The Omertas took Gomorrah and made it warm with red lamps and soft couches. Their business was intrigue, their smiles long and thin. The White Glove Society dined at the Ultra Luxe, chased elegance down quiet hallways, and made etiquette into armor. Rumors clung to them, whispers of a taste that old taboos called unforgivable. But rumor is a kind of currency in New Vegas, prized and spent. And truth, when it comes, arrives dressed like rumor anyway. Together with Mr. House's machines, they brought light back to the strip. Neon burned again. The Lucky 38's tower turned its strange profile on the sky, the casino itself standing silent and shuttered to all but invited guests. A reminder that some rooms are only for those who have already won. The monorail hissed, and the dancers rehearsed, and the dealers practiced their precise, kind hands. Out beyond the fence, people felt the pull. The strip was not safety exactly. It was gravity. Caravans with names that meant something, the Crimson Caravan most of all, set up their schedules like clockwork. The gun runners assembled weapons under a canopy of corrugated shade and built a respectable legend, one immaculate rifle at a time. Where money wanted to move, people built paths for it. Of course, New Vegas is a city, but never only a city. It is a hub in a wheel whose spokes run out into the Mojave. Follow one road and you find a town called Good Springs, built around a well and a shaded cemetery that knows more about patience than the living do. Go south and you come to Prim, the kind of place that leans on a roller coaster to say, we were once a party. Keep going and you meet the Mojave Outpost, 2 Bronze Rangers shaking hands forever across the highway. Follow the cracked blacktop east and you see the dinosaur of Novak, watching the road as if it could remember a time when it had a name. The desert is a ledger of attempts, some still being written. Head north, and the mountains open their folded arms to show a hidden bowl, Red Rock Canyon, where the great khans gathered after too many bad bargains went worse. The khans were traders first, then raiders when trade failed them. History is unkind to those who must change too quickly. Out toward Nellis Air Force Base, the boomers kept to themselves behind the punctuation of artillery. They were loud, but their hearts were set on a quiet dream. Sky, water, and flight. And they tended that dream the way others tend their gardens. Buried in the hills near Hidden Valley, the Brotherhood of Steel listened to their filtered air and their old creeds, clutching at a vision of the past where technology is sacred and the unworthy must be kept from its altar. Nearer to the strip, in Freeside, a man called the King led a school of loyalists with pompadours like crowns and soft hearts wrapped in leather jackets. Their creed was kindness served with a side of style. Freeside itself is the honest lobby of New Vegas, cracked and crowded, generous and cruel by turns. The followers of the apocalypse set up their clinic in an old church of stone and glass, the old Mormon fort, and there they taught and sewed and argued in gentle voices about how to make a better world using only the world they had. The Van Graffs sold energy weapons from a place called the Silver Rush, its name a dare. And in the hallways between you could trace the city's arteries by the lines of hungry people, patient people, hopeful people, each carrying a history you could only learn by buying a drink and shutting your mouth to listen. So much of New Vegas is water you cannot see. The lake, gripped between high walls of concrete at Hoover Dam, is the quiet truth under every flourish. Dam and turbines, spillways and sash windows, the old bones that make the Strip's bright grin possible. Long after the bombs, the new California Republic found its way east from Shady Sands and the old West Coast. Uniforms dusty, flags careful, their hunger not for neon, but for power and water. They wanted the dam and the flow of electricity it promised, the fields it could wet, the cities it could relight. They took Helios 1 from steel-clad zealots and tried to teach the sun to behave. They pushed to the river, laid claim to big structures and bigger words, treaties, outposts, jurisdiction, and in doing so, they brushed the edge of something else entirely. Across the Colorado, east of the dry gulches and the red stone fingers of the canyon lands, another nation was being made from harsher materials. Caesar's legion marched under bull banners and old Latin, folding tribes into a machine built out of fear and order. Its speech was spare. Its justice was a nail hammered flat, and yet it held. Men who had drifted in the wastes learned to march in lines. Towns that had known only chaos learned to expect sunrise to bring the same rules as the day before. To many it was a horror, to some a cure. To New Vegas, it was a storm approaching. The first shock of that storm came hard and left the ground changed. The Legion tried to take the dam. The new California Republic, spread thin but stubborn, held it. Memory calls that clash the first Battle of Hoover Dam, and it marks the Mojave's calendar the way summer solstice marks the old world's. After that, the air was full of waiting. Legionaries set up their camps along the eastern banks and stared at the west. NCR officers sharpened their pencils and their bayonets both wrote reports that said they were winning and led us home that were less certain. The Strip turned its face toward the river and smiled the kind of smile you wear when you have counted the exits. Mr. House, behind glass and wire, considered his math. This is the part of the story where most accounts raise their voice. They want to speak of decisive days and chosen fates. There is room for that later. Tonight, let us keep our gaze soft and our pace slow. Between those big banners, between NCR green and Legion red, between House's crone certainty and the dust's refusal to stay put, people continued to live. NCR sharecroppers bent their backs over fields that breathed only because the dam said they could. Westside farmers traded kale and prickly pear for scrap and stories. Freeside kids learned which shadows were kind and which were not. The kings negotiated with Securitrons, with merchants, with hunger. Followers washed blood from the clinic floor and then went back out to teach a class on keeping water clean. A caravan left the North Gate at dawn and got as far as a ruined billboard by noon. By dusk, it had sold out of Brahmin milk and been told 3 different versions of the same rumor about Red Rock. The gunrunner's kiosk chimed at midnight, dispensing the reassurance that weight and craftsmanship offer to anxious hands. The Strip kept its hour, the tables turned. New Vegas is, in this quiet light, not a question of who wins a dam. It is a set of bargains people make with themselves to stand one more day under an enormous sky. It is a promise that even in the wasteland, there will be a stage where you can try to be the person you tell yourself you are. It is a fence that shivers with neon, offering a boundary to cross and a story to enter. It is a city that did not die, and so became a mirror to the living. And somewhere far from the Strip's glow, along a road that keeps its secrets until it doesn't, a courier will one day carry a small, glittering piece of an old plan, a token polished by many hands and much intention. But that is a thread we will pick up later. For now, listen to the wind slide along the monorail track. Hear the clink of glass on glass in a casino where dawn never quite arrives. And picture the dam holding back a lake the color of old coins. New Vegas waits. It is patient. It always has been.
Chapter 2, The Platinum Promise.
Settle in. Let the neon dim to a patient pulse behind your eyes. There is a story small enough to slip into a pocket, heavy enough to tilt a city. It is a coin without a face, a wafer of thinking metal, a rumor packaged in chrome, the platinum chip. If Chapter 1 was the long breath before a show begins, this is the moment the stagehand lifts a single prop and the plot remembers its instructions. In a desert where maps are more suggestion than law, couriers are the faint lines that become roads. They walk and ride and drive the memory of routes into the land, between a sun-bit rock and the skeleton of a billboard, between a wind-polished sign and a quiet well. And those lines become habit, and habit becomes civilization. In the Mojave Express was the name on the door, but the work behind it was older. Strangers entrusted with messages, pockets entrusted with hopes. A package makes a promise. Deliveries are the desert's way of telling itself it still has a future. The platinum chip was, by all official reckonings, just that, a delivery. A small, sealed obligation with no hint of what it could awaken. The truth, silently soldered into its circuits, belonged to one man, or one idea wearing a man's shape, Mr. House. Before the Great War, he had conceived a second mind for his machines, a new instruction for his Securitrons, something that would turn polite greeters into soldiers that only a spreadsheet could love. The chip would let him speak to an army sleeping under the earth. It would open the right doors in the right bunker and say, "Wake." The war took his timetable and scattered it like sparrows. The chip never arrived. Decades later, the current tugged it back into the world. House felt the tug, so did others. To understand how the chip could matter, you must picture New Vegas not as a crown of neon, but as a web of quiet pressures. The strip glittered because water flowed and power hummed. Water flowed and power hummed because Hoover Dam still held the river in a concrete grip as delicate and decisive as a surgeon's hand. The new California Republic, all papers and patches, wanted to keep that hand closed. Across the Colorado, Caesar's Legion, made of iron discipline and harsher arithmetic, wanted to pry it open and redirect the flow toward a vision of empire. Mr. House wanted both sides to be so busy measuring one another that they would leave him the city, the vaults underneath, the contracts above, the charts that told him which fuse would burn and how fast.
Curiously, in the middle of those titans, people went on living. At Camp McCarran, under the shadow of the old airport terminal's glass grid, NCR officers wrote neat reports and spilled coffee on larger truths. Rangers with hard eyes and kinder hearts walked their stations, Delta, Echo, Golf, Juliet, on the lakeshore, in the hills, along the traces of the old interstates. At Camp Forlorn Hope, troopers sewed up their sleeves and each other, telling jokes that had learned to sound like prayers. In Novak, travelers bought rooms from a dinosaur with a hollow grin and woke to the sound of a town breathing, careful and tired. Near Lake Las Vegas, the NCR ran drills on green grass that remembered 1,000 sprinklers. At Helios 1, a tower made for the sun sulked at the horizon, its mirrors turned awkwardly toward a future that wouldn't look back. On the Legion side, Cottonwood Cove watched the river like a hawk and did not blink. While at Fortification Hill, the bull banners lifted and fell, the rhythm of a drum you could hear even when the air was still. The land, as always, kept score and made no speeches. Inside the strip, the three families performed their part of the balance. The chairman at the tops lived as if time were a friend who never failed to pick up the phone. In their lobby, carpet swallowed footsteps, and the band's horn section tried to talk the night into staying an hour longer. They had charm enough to make their lies feel like favors. The Omertas at Gomorrah preferred their truths in whispers. They traded in appetite, like stockbrokers reading a poisoned ticker. The White Glove Society at the Ultralux kept their knives so beautifully polished that most visitors never noticed the edge. They set their tables with the kind of precision that makes hunger behave. Over it all, the Lucky 38 watched with its eyelid half closed, an old cat pretending to sleep. Mr. House's face appeared on screens when he wished, smooth as a coin, his Securitrons offering smiles that never reached their optics. And then, like a quiet injury that only later proves it was mortal, one of the house machines fell. The story meanders here. Some say it was found half buried, some say it limped home to the wrong door, but what matters is this: it ended up in front of those who could not resist taking things apart to see if they could be made to obey. The machine learned a new word. Yes. It learned it so well that it could not say anything else. Yes, I will help you. Yes, I know the locks. Yes, I can explain the shape of the house that hides beneath the house. In time, those whispers reached the right ears. A man in a checkered suit, hair combed like a promise, smile sharpened to the perfect degree. Benny, chair and king at the tops, countenanced the strip's rules, but he did not love them. He loved the feeling of a leash slipping from his wrist. From that Securitron, our obliging yes-man, Benny learned about the platinum chip. He learned that the little circle of silicon and metal could teach Mr. House's entire police force new tricks, and could wake a sealed army in a bunker the Legion liked to stand on without knowing what was under its boots. The chip was on the move again. The Mojave Express had it, because of course it did. When you cannot trust a state, you trust the habit of a profession. The package moved from hand to hand with the unremarkable dignity of any parcel. Ulysses, a courier who listened to history too closely to ignore its warnings, declined the job. Another picked it up. Some say fate is a chain you cannot see. Some say it is a route on a map with 3 or 4 detours where the best coffee is. Either way, a courier set out along the quiet roads toward New Vegas with a small fortune that only a few men understood. The Mojave watched, the way it always watches, without blinking, without hurry. In Good Springs, where a cemetery anchors the town as if the dead knew best how to hold ground, people noticed a little more dust on the horizon and thought nothing rude of it. Victor, a Securitron who had been made to loiter among them under the guise of friendliness, rolled lazy circles and tipped his hat. Inside the Prospector Saloon, the fans turned like slow ideas. Coyote Springs, the wind remembered what water sounded like. Farther south, Prim's roller coaster rattled with no train on it. Along the river, the Legion rehearsed its right angles. At the dam, NCR mechanics listened to turbines like medics to a heartbeat and pretended not to hear the groans. Meanwhile, the strip hummed with small ambitions. In Freeside, the kings kept peace with songs and switchblades and an unexpected tenderness for strays. The followers stitched wounds and taught classes on water safety between skirmishes with despair. The Van Graffs sold light in weapon form and didn't ask about tomorrow. The Crimson Caravan argued over contracts with the practiced sighs of people who have already guessed the ending. The gunrunners counted parts and made new things out of old oaths. In Red Rock Canyon, the great cons traced their past with a finger. The massacres, the broken promises, the stubborn pride of a people who keep calling themselves a people because that is one thing nobody can take if you refuse to hand it over. At Nellis, the boomers polished a dream with careful hands and listened for the low hum of engines they did not yet have. In hidden valleys, buried halls, the Brotherhood of Steel breathed recycled air and recited their catechisms to the dark, guarding technology the way others guard children. All of it mattered. All of it was a net the platinum chip would fall into or break through, depending on how it was caught. In a way, the chip was not metal at all, but a question. Who should be using this dam? Who should be telling this strip what its lights mean? Who should be asking the desert to call them by a title? New Vegas was the kind of place that could live with many answers for a while. Its economy ran on ambiguity, but the chip's function was to make ambiguities choose sides. Benny did not plan to let the choice be made by the man in the tower. He fenced information, hired help, set an ambush the way one sets a table. Every place setting in order, every utensil with its role. The great cons he contracted for muscle were not the most reliable companions, But they knew the Mojave's back roads in their bones. They knew which gullies kept secrets and which fences could be cut. The meet was arranged, the route predicted, and the night chosen for its unremarkable stars. It is always the quiet nights that listen hardest. The rest you know, even if you don't yet know you know. A road that curves toward Good Spring Cemetery. A spade leaning against a mound of earth not yet certain of its purpose. A circle of men whose eyes have learned to be colder than their hands. The bright pop of old-world fabric stretched across the shoulders of a man who has become his own emblem. A speech that is short because the desert does not pay by the word. Then a flash, a sound like punctuation, and sand that has been waiting since before the bombs sighed as it accepted another secret. It is in the Mojave's nature to take and to return. The ground does not keep everything it is given. A digging noise, metallic and patient, interrupted the night's tidy ending. Victor's cheerful scream leaned into the pit. Servo's whirred with an enthusiasm that sounded, if you were alone and hurting, like kindness. Good Springs had a doctor who remembered when people were made of more than brittle parts. He was as surprised as anyone to find himself practicing again at midnight. The desert held its breath and then let it out slowly, a warm wind combing the Joshua trees. Explanations can wait. Resurrection always arrives before reasoning. For now, hold in your palm the small weight of a plan built before the world broke and delivered after. A plan that had learned to hide in the very routes that kept civilization polite. The platinum chip was back in play, though at that moment it lay in someone else's pocket. And the Mojave, city, camps, and canyon both, leaned fractionally toward a future it could not yet name. While that future gathered itself, the present kept busy. NCR patrols checked the watches and lit cigarettes against orders. The Legion's scouts watched the West Bank and reported what it had done yesterday and the day before. On the Strip, a Securitron announced a showtime with perfect punctuality, and a gambler believed for 3 hands that the night loved him. At the Ultralux, a server glided like a swan and did not look at the knives. At Gomorrah, a deal closed in a booth where the light was too red to be trusted. At the Tops, a singer tested a note and found it true. In Freeside, a student wrote clean water in a notebook and underlined it twice. At Nellis, a boy put his ear to the fuselage of a silent plane and swore he could hear it breathe. In Red Rock, a Khan counted the bruises on his people and called it history. In Hidden Valley, machinery that hadn't been turned on in years hummed 2 tones in disagreement, and a scribe wrote both down out of respect. New Vegas, in other words, did what it does best. It waited beautifully. It let the pieces assemble themselves on the board while pretending the game was only for tourists. It smiled with all its lights. It poured drinks. It repaired fences. It ferried water. And it kept a seat empty on the monorail as if someone important had only stepped out for a moment. It did not know, not exactly, that the person it was waiting for had already been introduced to the desert in the most intimate way possible and had been returned, dusty and surprised, to their feet. We will follow that person soon. We will trace the path of the chip from pocket to palm, from elevator to penthouse, from underground bunker to the living, blinking army that dreams of order. We will listen to Mr. House's math and to the bull's drumbeat and to NCR's patient bureaucracy, and we will see how the Strip can be both stage and judge. For tonight, let the scene hold: a town named for water, a city named for stubbornness, a river held by will and concrete, a coin of secrets in a pocket that doesn't yet understand the price. The promise gleams, the Mojave notices, the story leans forward. Let the Mojave rise slowly in your mind, the way heat rises from a road at noon. Picture a small town stitched together with boards and memory, a clinic with lights that work more often than not, a saloon where the fans push the air in patient circles. Good Springs is the name, an old word for a reliable kindness. Here, beneath a hill pinned with white headstones, a courier woke to a second chance, stitched and steadied by a doctor who kept pre-war textbooks on a shelf and hope in his pocket. Outside, a Securitron named Victor rolled lazy loops, whistling a tune only circuits can remember, as if fate could be disguised as neighborly curiosity.
Good Springs is a lesson if you want one. It says that history is not only made by banners and towers, it is made by the conversations people have when they think no one important is listening. In the Prospector Saloon, Trudy poured drinks and kept the peace with the soft authority of someone who has seen gunfights and prefers not to see another. Sunny Smiles taught newcomers how to handle a varmint rifle without hurting themselves or the geckos. Ringo, a caravan man, nursed the sort of trouble that comes from debts and chances badly taken. Facing him were the powder gangers, escapees from the NCR Correctional Facility, men who had learned to love dynamite more than they loved tomorrow. Their leader in town, Joe Cobb, wore a scowl you could scale plywood with. What happens next, in Good Springs, is the Mojave in miniature. The town can be defended, and sometimes it is. The townsfolk gather, pitchforks beside rifles, and the powder gangers learn that a place with a name can be harder to crack than it looks. Or the town can bow its head, and the red dust on the street becomes a warning instead of a welcome. Either way, a choice is made, and the road north remembers it. The Mojave has a good memory. It just doesn't argue about it. Northward, the blacktop bends toward Prim, where an empty roller coaster leans over the highway like a lanky sentinel. The Mojave Express office sits there, its ledgers a neat record of promises in transit. Johnson Nash and his partner can tell you about packages and people in the same breath, because in the desert the two are often the same. But Prim, of late, had been all loose screws and nerves. Convicts spilled from NCRCF, crossed the dry draws, and took the town like a gust takes a screen door, sudden and loud, leaving things bent. Deputy Beagle was missing. The Bison Steve Hotel, all faded paint and stubborn signage, echoed with the footsteps of men who did not belong to it. Prim's trouble distilled a different question. Who keeps the law when the law is tired? The town could take an NCR badge, and with it the weight of distant regulations. It could choose a drifter with a backbone and make him sheriff. It could let a robot cowboy, Prim Slim, learn the job from old files and polite subroutines. Each answer writes the streetlight's shadow at a slightly different angle. Each has defenders in the bar and detractors on the porch. The Mojave does not insist. It watches to see which stories last. Beyond Prim, the road crawls toward the twin statues at the Mojave outpost, a pair of bronze rangers joined in a handshake that never ends. NCR troopers bivouac under the metal guardians and talk about quotas and family and the price of shoe leather. Caravans stack up here, contracts in one hand and coffee in the other,
waiting for someone with a rifle and a steady stride to walk point through the passes. You can feel a state gathering itself, clipboards, dust, and duty stitched into a rough standard issue. And then, like a shout in a library, Nipton. The town's welcome sign grins too wide, its lottery tickets fluttering like confetti that forgot how to celebrate. The Legion swept through with the tidy brutality of a storm that likes straight lines. They left behind a lesson written in smoke and an argument that people keep having even when no one is there to listen. Does fear make order? And if it does, is order worth what it costs? Among the ruins, a survivor might laugh or cry at the wrong time, because some messages are louder than the body knows how to bear. Nipton marks travelers. Even if you never stop, the heat seems different for a few miles afterward. Novak waits like a sigh after that, its dinosaur billboard, dinky, watching the highway with a smile too simple for the work of a century. In the motel's rooms, the nights run long and the curtains are not as thick as you wish. Here lives Boone, a former NCR sniper whose gaze can make silence feel heavier. His history is a pocketed stone, worn smooth, full of weight. The town gathers around its little market. Cliff Briscoe sells souvenirs that can be weapons if you are honest about it. At the edge of things, the Repcon test site lifts its conical tower against the sky. Inside, feral ghouls bicker with their hunger, and other ghouls, lucid, determined, follow Jason Bright, a man of faith in a starward direction. They dream of a launch, of fire properly directed, of leaving the Mojave behind to find a peace no map can promise. Whether their rockets sing or sputter is a detail historians will argue over. The important part is that they tried, and in the trying showed that belief can build scaffolding higher than fear. Between Novak and the Strip, the road scatters choices like brass casings. There is Helios 1, where the NCR stares at a field of mirrors and pretends it understands the old world's tongue. The tower called Archimedes is a riddle of power, light for homes or a spear for war. A person can walk the catwalks there and decide whether the sun should warm hands or burn horizons. Farther along, searchlight glows for the wrong reasons. Radiation makes a different kind of dawn there, quiet and cruel. Camp Forlorn Hope sits with a back bent, a forward base where paperwork and bandages fail at the same rate, and no one says the word defeat because the dictionary was redacted. Across the river at Nelson, the Legion plants its banners and nails its lessons to the day. The rangers at the edge watch with binoculars and restraint, two hard disciplines. Boulder City is where the past shows its teeth politely. The memorial to NCR dead stands solid and squared, the names chiseled, as if that could keep them. Here, beneath blasted rock and careful statues, the great Khans hold a grudge that looks like a family heirloom. They lost sons and cousins in an NCR ambush years back. They lost face in the Mojave's market of reputations. Now a hostage crisis and a negotiation remind everyone that the Khans are not gone. They are bruised history, wearing new clothes. Stories here always mention a man in a checkered suit passing through not long ago, the kind of detail bartenders remember forever. By the time the road tilts toward New Vegas proper, the traveler is seasoned by witnesses. Freeside receives them like a noisy foyer, alive, hungry, improvising. The Kings run their school of style and loyalty out of an old theater, pompadours like declarations, kindness served with swagger. The followers of the apocalypse make a clinic from a church and, with stubborn gentleness, turn compassion into policy. At Mick and Ralph's, you can buy a miracle patched with duct tape. At the Silver Rush, the Van Graffs sell light bottlenecked into weapons and pretend it is only business. Sarah Weintraub, downstairs at Vault 21, keeps a boutique and a belief that fair games can be a culture. Somewhere amid it all, orphans trade jokes like currency and learn routes through alleys that maps don't include. If there is a soul to New Vegas, it hums loudest in Freeside's contradictions. At the North Gate or the Strip's main arch, Securitrons stand with that permanent smile that never quite reaches concern. Entry is a test of caps, of connections, of whether the machines have been told to like your face. Those who pass find a street that pretends time is a circle. The Tops throws open its doors with a brass flourish. The Ultra-Lux glides past with linen and hush. Gomorrah winks and drinks the shadows. The Lucky 38, tallest and quietest, keeps its invitation in a pocket only one man can reach. Yet, when the courier arrives, Victor is there again, all howdy and convenience, and the tower's sealed doors whisper open, as if the city had been waiting for that exact footstep. Inside the Lucky 38, Mr. House returns to the world as a voice, a visage, a calculation wearing manners. He tells a story that began before the bombs and has been waiting, like a Securitron in sleep mode, to resume. The platinum chip, he explains, is not an ornament but a key, and not to the casino floor. It will slide into a console in a bunker where the Legion pitches its tents above, at Fortification Hill. It will also slide into the heart of the Strip's network and whisper new instructions to every Securitron in earshot. Old models will learn new tricks. Polite greeters will become soldiers who can redraw arguments with their footsteps. House speaks of stability, of a city that can decline to choose between bear and bull because it has already chosen itself. But voices echo in the tops too. Benny keeps a bar stool warm and a plan warmer. Yes man, the obliging Securitron who forgot how to say no, waits with a grin that is 90% permission and 10% mischief. The chip could be used by House to crown his old design, by Benny to swap one king for another, by the NCR to add enforcement to paperwork, by the Legion to sabotage a rival's future, or by a courier to put the entire decision tree through a new kind of filter, the human conscience in the present tense. New Vegas gathers crossroads, the way the desert gathers heat. Think of the factions not as stereotypes in costumes, but as different answers to the same fear, that the world is too big to be kind without being firm. The NCR believes process is a kind of mercy. Checks, balances, elections that may be dusty but try at least to be fair. The Legion believes harshness saves more than it breaks, that civilization is a discipline you must rehearse with a whip until it becomes muscle memory. Mr. House believes that intelligence wedded to machinery can keep the human failings at bay without needing to reform them. The followers believe in people as they are, persuadable and worthwhile, and the kings believe that dignity, even the theatrical kind, can prevent war better than a law sometimes can. The boomers dream of flight, because flight is a horizon nobody can legislate. The Brotherhood, in its bunker, believes that ownership of technology is the same as stewardship of the future. The great Khans believe a people can be bruised and still be a people. The gun runners believe craftsmanship is a language that even a wasteland respects. And the Strip believes that the game is only worth playing if there are more than 2 seats at the table. Before any of those beliefs can declare themselves victorious, small errands and quiet mercies continue to add up. A sharecropper's field on the NCR side gets enough water to stay green because someone cleaned a filter at the right hour. A Freeside patient survives the night because a passerby remembered where the followers keep their stim packs. A caravan changes its route because a ranger at the Mojave outpost drew a skull on the wrong map for the right reason. A boomer at Nellis listens to the sky and makes a vow he will keep for the rest of his life. A Khan in Red Rock watches the sun move and decides pride might be something you carry, not something you swing. None of these make headlines. All of them make a city. So the courier, resurrected, bruised, warned by ghosts at every mile marker, stands now in a city that does not announce its tests. Mr. House has made his pitch from behind polished glass. Benny is pretending not to know the past while being very sure about the future. Securitrons hum like patient bees along the Strip's curb. Across the river, the Legion's tents move like a dull wave when the wind lifts them. At McCarran, schedules breed schedules, and the monorail carries the weary to the gates of glamour. The platinum chip is somewhere between a promise and a threat. And New Vegas does what it always does at moments like this. It smiles, and then it waits. We will take our time with what comes next. There is a penthouse where a checkered suit can be confronted and a history revised. There is a bunker under Fortification Hill full of sleeping steel and a decision measured in volts. There are treaties to be honored or torn up, and flags to be folded or flown. There is, as always, the question of who the Mojave belongs to, a question that the Mojave itself, stubborn and vast, refuses to answer in anything but seasons. For now, listen to the Strip settling into its midnight posture. Music like warm brass, dice like soft rain, the distant organ note of turbines at the dam, and the softer sound of water moving through pipes toward faucets and fields. A city awake, a desert listening, a road still warm from footsteps. Chapter 4. The city makes its choices. Let the Strip breathe in your mind like a cat along a sunny sill, unbothered, watchful, pretending sleep. Elevators whisper. Carpets drink footsteps. Somewhere a trumpet tests 2 notes and decides the night is ready. In this warm hush, the next movements begin. Not with a gunshot. History remembers too many of those. But with doors sliding open at the tops. Benny ran his casino like a well-pressed suit. Smooth lapels, pockets where you expected them, a knife you didn't. To his staff, he was a rhythm, keep it cool, keep it clean. And to the Strip, he was proof that a smile can be a strategy. When the courier walked in, some say Swank noticed more than he said. Some say the elevators knew their passenger by trouble alone. Whichever version you prefer, the story turns on a room with a broad window and a checkered jacket trying to charm the past into forgetting itself. Confrontations in New Vegas rarely shout. They negotiate. Perhaps there were words. Perhaps there was a stage-managed apology. Perhaps the elevators did more work than the pistols did. What matters is the shape of the aftermath. The platinum chip came back into reach, and with it the city's poised equations lost their balance. Benny's plan, remove House, crown himself, found its margin notes smudged. In some tellings he fled, in others he fell. In all, the Strip felt a brief chill as one persona slipped from its stage. Across the boulevard at the Lucky 38, Mr. House watched with the unblinking patience of electronics. He preferred the language of outcomes. The platinum chip, he said, was a key with two locks, one in the Strip's own network, one beneath Fortification Hill across the Colorado. Insert the chip at the Lucky 38, and every Securitron in earshot learns a new body, hidden weapons, sterner armor, a meaner smile. Insert it at the bunker under the Legion's camp, and a sleeping army wakes with fresh instructions. The math was elegant. With the upgrade, House could guarantee a city that answered to him and to no flag, a Vegas that brokered its own survival between bear and bull. But elegant math has rivals, and the Mojave keeps score in plural. The Legion's scouts had seen the Securitron that said yes to every question. The Legion's leader had noticed the courier now knotted into the Strip's business. One day, an invitation arrived written in the iron grammar of the East. Cross the river. Visit the fort. Witness power that breathes without neon. Fortification Hill, all dust and drum beats, made a theater of austerity. There, under the banners and the cliff, a door in the earth waited. The other lock House had spoken of. Caesar, patient and certain, asked for the bunker to be purged. He wanted the future reduced to present tense. Here the quiet history opens its forks. In some versions, the courier played both host and guest to many ideas at once, carried the chip below, saw the narrow concrete halls, the sealed vaults of steel, the coils like sleeping snakes, and chose to press the button that made the Securitrons blink awake. A subterranean sunrise of optics and whirring servos before walking out past the Legion's tents without changing expression. In other versions, the bunker coughed smoke and went still forever. All we need for tonight is the shape of the choice. A hand on a switch, a city exhaling, the sense that something long planned had finally heard its name. If the Strip's robots learned their new tricks, the change was immediate and everywhere. Patrols moved with a different weight. Voices that had only soothed now hinted they could enforce. This did not stop New Vegas from serving drinks. It only changed who was allowed to speak above a whisper. The Lucky 38 opened its upper doors to some. In the penthouse behind armored glass, the voice of House explained again what he had always said. Stability, independence, the promise that Las Vegas had survived the end of the world and would therefore survive the ends of arguments. For some, his plan sounded like mercy with clean lines. For others, it sounded like one more man deciding for many, this time with machines instead of votes. Quiet histories preserve both opinions. They also remember that in a small, sterile room deep inside the tower, Mr. House's life was not a metaphor, but a body, kept, protected, narrowed to the business of being a custodian of equations. In some accounts, the machines continued their work unbothered. In others, the machines were turned off, and a long vigilance ended with a single hand pulling a single plug. New Vegas seldom agrees on the details. It depends which bar you ask. While the high acts unfolded, the city's side stages refined their own scripts. In Gomorrah, the Omertas rehearsed a violent ambition. Their silence was a plan masquerading as discretion. They courted out-of-town muscle, stockpiled parts, and talked to the Legion with the kind of smiles that don't reach the eyes. The plot could have bloomed red along the strip if not for interruptions. A ledger read, a conversation overheard, a man named Caccino deciding that self-preservation sometimes looks like confession. In the telling many prefer, the plot was defanged before showtime. In darker versions, Securitrons had to make a case study of what order means in neon. At the Ultralux, etiquette reigned so completely that rumor looked improper just standing in the lobby. The White Glove Society wore civility like a creed. Old whispers, cannibalism and its many euphemisms, hung around their chandeliers like cobwebs that only certain angles reveal. There, too, the courier's shadow appears in the histories. A missing person found, a menu corrected, a reputation redirected either toward grace or toward secrets snapped shut. The versions differ. The moral is steady. In New Vegas, image and substance are siblings who sometimes share clothes. The chairman in the tops learned how quickly a throne becomes a reminder. With Benny gone or diminished, leadership became a question not of charisma, but of continuity. Swank's practicality often features here, a man who loved the tops as a place more than as a mirror. However it shook out, the band kept its set, the dealers kept their cadence, and the casino learned to live without the checkered punctuation it once used. Freeside, in the shadow of all this, was busy with its own algebra of dignity. The Kings and the NCR found their lines crossing in ways that stung. Refugees pressed against the narrow gates, caps were short, tempers shorter. A spark here could make a kind of fire that laws are bad at putting out. The followers argued for aid without strings. The kings argued for respect that didn't have to be purchased. The NCR argued that order requires lines and lines require enforcement. In the version of the tale that sleeps easiest, a courier walked between camps and convinced men to leave their pride at the coat check. A general stepped back from a show of force. A lieutenant named Pacer learned that peace sometimes sounds like swallowing a word. In other versions, fists talked first. Either way, the strip felt the tremor and pretended it was only the monorail passing. Beyond the fence, the Mojave's tribes tested their futures. At Nellis, the boomers continued to ring their lines with artillery and their hearts with a vow. Their dream had the clean geometry of flight, resurrect a B-29 from the cold cradle of Lake Mead, make engines that had been silent since the sirens sing again, touch sky. The task required humility. The lake's depths are a language, and ingenuity, the currency of the wastes. When the bomber rose out of green water like a memory forgiven, the boomers proved something about the desert that guidebooks never say. Here, obsession is a form of hope. Later, when asked to pick a side in the larger quarrel, the boomers answered with a principle: help those who helped us, and a demonstration no one could argue with. The sky writes its own footnotes. In Red Rock Canyon, the great Khans read their history aloud. Bitter Springs, once a name on a map outside Novak, was in their mouths a wound. An NCR operation gone wrong, a massacre engraved in memory, a reason to dislike uniforms and their promises. Papa Khan kept the tribe together by force of will and ritual. Regis argued for a softer survival. A smooth-talking envoy from the Legion, Karl, argued that the East would honor what the West had only punished. The tribe weighed its pride against its children. In the quietest and truest versions, someone suggested a different horizon entirely. Leave the Mojave. Seek the old Khan routes in the mountains north and east. Become again what they were before they became a cautionary tale. The Khans are stubborn, yes. They also know when a canyon is a dead end dressed as a home. Beneath Hidden Valley, air circulated through filters that had learned the smell of the same faces day after day. The Brotherhood of Steel guarded its technology the way others guard altars. Elder McNamara and Head Paladin Hardin represent two hymns in their choir: patience versus assertion, secrecy versus policing. Their patrols clashed with the NCR like magnets, drawn and repelled in cycles. In some tellings, diplomacy found a new page: agreements about bunkers and boundaries, scribe pens put to truce documents. In sterner versions, the Brotherhood's bunker learned what it means to lose a war of attrition with a state that owns a dam. Either way, the Mojave's future kept asking them a question the past had spoiled them from hearing. Is hoarding stewardship or is teaching? Elsewhere, the NCR fought a war with its stationary objects. At Camp McCarran, a monorail connected the strip to the Army's paperwork with a neat line. Rumor says the Legion found a way to turn that neat line into an exclamation point. There are versions where a bomb is discovered in time, and versions where it writes itself into the morning as smoke over the tracks. At Helios 1, scientists with tatty sleeves argued with officers about whether the sun should be a neighbor or a weapon. At Forlorn Hope, even the name could not stop the troopers from trying again. Ranger stations along the lake watched the water and learned to measure hope in days of quiet. The followers of the apocalypse worked the old Mormon fort as if it were a verb: to follow, to teach, to re-stitch a social fabric with thread made from patience. They fixed teeth and rifles and misunderstandings and wrote down what they learned in notebooks that did not survive every fight, but survived enough. Julie Farkas's clipboard appears in several accounts, not because clipboards are romantic, but because record-keeping is a kind of tenderness in a world that forgets so easily. In this chapter of the city's life, Yes Man, the obliging Securitron, smiles from the margins like a stagehand who knows the whole script. He could tally favors, track allegiances, count which tribes might accept a future where the Strip chose itself. If the courier asked, he could lay out a path for an independent New Vegas, neutralize the Omerta's more aggressive ambitions, decide on the Brotherhood's role, consider the Boomers' artillery an asset, resolve Freeside's quarrels, understand the Khan's exit as subtraction without humiliation. The math was less about force than about consent. The strip, in this imagining, would be a broker rather than a subject. Mr. House disliked the word consent. The NCR found it tidy but slow. The Legion considered it a luxury. And the Mojave, with its ruined billboards and faithful wells, went on asking its question in a low, even voice. What lets people sleep? Lights that never go out. Rules you can set your watch by. A balance of rudenesses so precise that no one dares knock the table. Or a promise, imperfect, human, that decisions can be made in rooms with many chairs. Personal histories braided themselves with the cities. Boone, up in Novak's dinosaur mouth, kept vigil over a past he could not dismiss. In some retellings, he and the courier wrote an ending for the names carved at Bitter Springs that felt less like revenge and more like acknowledgement. Veronica, wandering from Hidden Valley to the Strip and back, argued with her elders by simply liking the world outside. Depending on who narrates, she found either hope or confirmation enough to keep wearing the same colors with a different heart. Rowell watched the Mojave as if it were a clock whose hands he had repaired too many times. Lily remembered versions of people the present no longer included. Cass, with a bottle and a ledger of grudges, counted the cost of progress on caravan routes and found the math wanting. Arcade, polite and exact, tried to find a place where principle did not have to apologize to power. Even Rex, the king's old dog with a medal in his head, needed a favor only the wasteland could grant. Quiet history likes these footnotes. They are the fingers that actually turn the pages. By now, the second battle for Hoover Dam was not so much a rumor as a season. The NCR moved men and ink with equal determination. Caesar's camps traded news the way soldiers trade rations. The Strip polished its brass and counted its chips, preparing for a future where it would be either host, judge, or prize. Factions that had once been local color became columns in a ledger of alliances. The radio DJs told jokes with an extra breath between punchlines, as if making room for something coming up the road. The turbines at the dam kept their low hymn, a bass note under every conversation, before the shouting starts. Next time, perhaps. This is the last quiet inventory. The platinum chip, in the versions where it did its work, has already drawn a brighter edge on the Strip's machines. Benny's chapter has closed with a flourish, or a footnote. The boomers have taste-tested the sky. The great Khans, in the stories where they survive as themselves, have begun to teach their children a word older than revenge. Elsewhere. The Brotherhood has decided to either be a museum that bites or a school that learns. The Omertas have been reminded that conspiracies look bad under neon. The chairman and the White Glove Society have revised their scripts to account for a different lead actor. Freeside has discovered that mercy can be efficient when someone bothers to count. And the Courier, stitched once in Goodsprings, stitched again by choices, stands at a balcony or a causeway or the lip of a canyon and looks toward a wall of concrete, holding a river that does not enjoy being told where to go. It is not a question of heroism. It is a question of stewardship. Who do you trust with the switch, and why? The Mojave does not answer. It waits, as always, with an enormous patience, and lets people practice being the kind of person they would like to be remembered as. Listen to it. The murmur of cards, the procession of boots on a catwalk, a radio lullaby drifting from a kitchen window in Westside, the faint thud-thud of artillery at Nellis, the monorail's sigh, and beneath it all, the dam's steady breath. The city has made many small choices. Soon, it will make a loud one. Chapter 5. The Day the Dam Listened. Imagine Hoover Dam before dawn. The concrete breathes a deep, steady note that sounds like patience. Water presses on one side, the river drops away on the other, and in the middle a spine of galleries, switches, catwalks, and turbine halls waits for footfalls to decide what kind of day it will be. The air is cool there, scented with oil and stone. Even the gulls are careful in the gray light. It is a place built to endure, not to argue, but the Mojave has never asked a structure what it prefers. The second battle for Hoover Dam is often told with trumpet flourishes, as if banners could make the wind obey. Quiet history uses a softer lens. It notices the way a ranger checks her boots before she checks her rifle. It remembers the way engineers pat the casings of turbines like old horses. It keeps track of the coffee ring on a map above the visitor center, and the smear of red dirt on the doorknob to the Western power plant. It hears the first clipped orders at Camp McCarran and the reply across the river, where tents move in rows like a field of dull wheat. It watches the strip dim its lights by a fraction, the way theaters do when the overture begins. On the NCR side, the work looked like organization. General Lee Oliver had his lines and his timelines. Colonel Shue watched the puzzle as a whole from McCarran. Chief Hanlon at Camp Golf wrote in a notebook and spoke to his rangers with the weariness of a man who loved the land more than the headlines about it. Troopers took their places along the rim and in the galleries. At the ranger stations on the lake, Delta, Echo, Golf, Juliet, their counterparts checked binoculars and said nothing they didn't have to say. Somewhere in the admin wing, someone swore softly at a stuck drawer. Somewhere on the top deck, a flag unfurled and then thought better of it. Across the Colorado, the Legion prepared in right angles. Their tents squared themselves against the wind. Their scouts reported in spare phrases. Legate Lanius, the Legion's hard edge made into a man, stood at the heart of it with a silence that did not ask for questions. Caesar, the mind that named the East and drilled it into an army, was, in many tellings, ill around this time, the body's private rebellion beginning to show in the empire's public stride. In some versions he had already fallen, in others he had not. Either way, the order was the same. Take the dam, take the power that lit the strip, and with it, take the story the Mojave tells itself every night. Between them, the river carried on, unseduced by rhetoric. The lake behind the dam lay green and heavy, dotted with intake towers like white chess pieces. On the far shore, the drowned skeleton of a bomber slept in its cradle of silt, unless, in some communities' proud accounts, it had already risen. And threading through all of it, the courier and the little chrome argument in their pocket, the platinum chip, had made their earlier choices. In those versions where Mr. House's upgrade ran its instructions through the strip, Securitrons patrolled with a firmer tread. In those where the Fortification Hill bunker had heard the key turn and wake, new machines waited under the earth for an introduction to daylight. In those where the bunker had been destroyed, that particular future had been trimmed short with a decisive snip. Yes Man smiled in the background of every possibility. a stagehand who could move entire sets without raising his voice. The day began in fragments. A scout spotted movement at dawn, and a radio whispered it into a headset that already knew. NCR snipers up on the rim exhaled in long, disciplined lines. On the east, cohorts took their first steps from the red dirt down toward the bridge. In some retellings, a distant thunder moved before any boot did, the boomers sending a few careful reminders from Nellis that the sky is nobody's property. Their shells marched a dotted line along the far bank like punctuation that could not decide between period and colon. In tales where the Enclave remnants found a reason to come out of retirement, a shadow crossed the canyon, the old world's bird tracing one last arc, and then was gone again, leaving gossip that would ripen into legend. In others, the sky stayed quiet and watchful, as if unwilling to take sides. What followed looked up close like doors, opening and closing. On the top deck, squads traded positions behind concrete buttresses stamped with the old Bureau of Reclamation's sensibilities. In the galleries, the fight bent around corridors and doorways that framed each decision in steel. In the turbine halls, the sound of fire and echo learned to live on the same register as the dam's steady hum. More than one account pauses here to point out a mechanic who kept a wrench in his belt all day and only drew it once, to tighten a bolt that a ricochet had jarred loose. The Mojave forgives such priorities. Power must flow, or the strip's boast is only paint. The outcomes fork along 4 well-worn paths, each with countless footnotes. In the versions where the NCR holds, Hoover Dam becomes proof that bureaucracy, when sufficiently stubborn, is indistinguishable from bravery. The eastern assault breaks against layered defenses and the quiet brutality of logistics that arrived on time. On the far side of the dam, at the Legion's camp, tact turns into retreat. The bull banners, so fond of wind, fold for once. On the near side, General Oliver moves to the visitor center to claim the narrative with the broad gestures of a man who is practiced for this moment. The courier meets him there. What happens depends on how the Mojave has learned to hear that person's voice. Sometimes the general receives counsel that sounds like criticism, and for once, listens. The NCR leaves the strip to govern itself and keeps its hands on the dam, but not on the city's throat. Other times, pride and paperwork make the victory loud and the aftermath clumsy. Either way, sharecroppers keep their water. Camp Forlorn Hope erases a word from its banner, only for a while, but sometimes a while is enough. In the versions where Mr. House prevails, the dam becomes an example more than a prize. The Securitrons, new tricks hidden behind old smiles, arrive with immaculate timing. They do not hate, they implement. They push both flags away from the strip's fence with the neutrality of a machine that knows only one boss. The courier crosses catwalks to a terminal, the chip having done its older work already, and the dam's infrastructure shivers to attention under a single operator. General Oliver discovers that ceremony can be cancelled by force majeure. Legate Lanius discovers that the mathematics of attrition can include an unexpected variable labeled proprietary. In the Lucky 38, a screen brightens and Mr. House's immaculate voice writes a new contract. New Vegas will be independent under his guardianship. The NCR may purchase power. The Legion may attempt rhetoric on the far bank. All may gamble, provided they understand that the house always wins. The strip gleams a fraction brighter. Freeside feels the line tighten and promises itself not to flinch. In the yes-man versions, call them independent, though independence in the Mojave always borrows chairs from many porches, the strip claims itself. The boomers, if befriended, mark the far hills with loud caution. Allies gathered along the way lend their small strengths in concert. Foes who insisted on old grudges find their arguments politely retired. The Securitrons answer not to a recluse in a tower, but to a consensus built in alleys and lobbies, brokered by a courier who has learned how many people fit at one table. At the fort, Lanius meets words as if they were blades, and in some quiet endings is persuaded to sheath his own. In others, he refuses and meets the fate he had meant to export. At the visitor center, General Oliver meets the same choice: accede to a city's right to draw its own boundary, or bark until the machines do not permit barking. The victory here does not have a single statue to tuck it into. It has a list of names in Freeside, Westside, Novak, and beyond. People who find that sleep comes a little easier because the strip's smile is, for once, not borrowed. In the Legion's versions, the river learns a new vocabulary: discipline imposed like weather. The bridge fills from east to west with men who have rehearsed being unafraid. NCR positions collapse not for lack of courage, but for lack of the right kind of luck. The ranger stations send their last clean reports and then static. The visitor center changes hands. The strip looks east and understands, too late, that some futures have no appetite for compromise. New Vegas lives on. Cities are hard to kill, but it speaks in lower tones. The casinos dim. The etiquette shifts. A new tax is levied on laughter that isn't supervised. Even in these tellings, though, the Mojave's habit of sapping extremes remains. The Legion must govern as well as conquer. Water still demands respect. The dam keeps humming because even empires are subject to physics. What all versions agree on is that the dam listened that day. It expressed the will of whoever could keep the turbines turning and the walkways clear. Afterward, its concrete remembered boots and echoes the way an old house remembers a family. People visited the memorial on the rim and added a name or a flower. The wind tested the new flags and found them made of the same threads as the old ones, only rearranged. The lake watched itself in the morning and kept its secrets. The ripples reached farther than the canyon. At Nellis, the boomers measured respect not in speeches, but in flights authorized and not regretted. They kept their artillery under tarps most days and their bomber stories ready for every night. In Red Rock Canyon, the great Khans, if they chose exile over entanglement, packed their pride with their tents and went in search of old trails to make new again. In those accounts, the Mojave became a place they spoke of as a stern teacher rather than an enemy. In Hidden Valley, the Brotherhood either learned diplomacy as a new incantation or sealed a door that would someday fail for want of oil. Scribes recorded both outcomes with equal ink, because record-keeping is an act of faith that tomorrow will care. Freeside found that relief and responsibility share a border. If the Strip's independence grew, Freeside gained room to invent. The kings patrolled with an ear for trouble and a hand for mercy. The followers turned clinic notes into classes, and classes into customs. Westside's gardens, pipe-fed, hope-tended, raised another row of green and called it progress without apology. At the Crimson Caravan, contracts shifted tone. At the Gunrunner's kiosk, the clerk etched another notch on the day's sales and did not bother to look triumphant. The Van Graffs kept their showroom as bright as ever, because light is good for business and bad for secrets. At McCarran, whether the NCR left with honors or with a bruise, soldiers packed crates with the careful speed of people who understand the difference between going and being gone. Ranger stations counted down a list of codes and then sent their last reports with the odd melancholy of routine mastered and retired. Helios 1 either settled into being a power station that the Mojave could trust, or it continued to brood under the sun, a monument to the old world's twin talent for generosity and menace. In certain fireside versions, a spear of daylight had answered a signal once somewhere out in the desert, an impossible bright punctuation that nobody could unsee afterward, best left as a cautionary story for engineers. At the fort, tents were struck or reordered. The weathered wood palisades learned a new set of names for the same old grudges. Cottonwood Cove kept the river's smell and its own. People came and went on the pontoon boats. They left no wake that lasted long because the current is older than any plan men make on its banks. And the Strip? It did what cities do after a decision. It normalized the extraordinary. The top set a new set list and pretended it had always been this way. The Ultralux refreshed its lobby flowers and restored any scuffed marble with the zeal of a creed. Gomorrah found a new equilibrium, either chastened by a foiled plot or restrained by a watchful peace. The Lucky 38 remained itself, which is to say, aloof, a tower that meant either stewardship or surveillance, depending on your debts. The monorail returned to its sighing schedule where it could. The fountains copied rain for another night. Neon rehearsed its lines and did not forget any of them. As for the Courier, quiet history leaves them standing for a moment on the dam's western parapet, looking out over a river that has outlived kings and committees both. A breeze climbs the face of the wall and presses a spray of mist against their sleeves. Below, the turbines keep that deep animal purr, the sound of a bargain honored between human will and a force that does not care how you voted. There are endings where friends stand beside them. Boone, whose gaze finds a softer place on the horizon for once. Veronica, who smiles as if a door somewhere has finally been cracked open. Cass, who pours a drink that tastes less like forgetting. Arcade, whose questions have a place to live. Raoul, who decides to oil one more hinge. Lily, who remembers a name she hasn't said in years. Rex, who leans against a knee and watches the water without blinking. There are endings where those friends have taken other roads. The Mojave accepts both. It is large enough. The dam keeps its counsel. It does not pronounce judgment. It will host weddings and arguments, picnics and patrols. It will be a landmark for those who are lost and a chore for those who are paid to keep it alive. At night, when the Strip throws its light against the clouds and the lake turns black like polished stone, Hoover Dam becomes what the old engineers intended. Not a symbol, but a tool. The meaning lingers in the people who use it. In the weeks after, you can hear the new arrangement in the small sounds.
There is a laugh in Freeside with fewer teeth missing. There is a ledger at Westside with one more column labeled excess. There is a troop train that leaves McCarran with more waves than jeers. There is a rumor in Novak that the road is a little safer, and then someone's grandmother says, "Don't be a fool," and hands over a better map anyway. There is a repairman at Helios 1 who hums while he works and does not worry what the hum means. There is a king who takes off his shades in a room where a child is sleeping. There is a white glove who eats a meal she truly enjoys. There is an omerta who decides a ledger is more interesting than a scheme. There is a chairman dealer who stops a game for a minute to listen to a trumpet solo and is not punished for it. The Mojave does not become gentle. It becomes itself again. A place where water defines honesty, where concrete can host 1,000 arguments without cracking, where the night can be beautiful without being safe. New Vegas, bright and stubborn, continues to welcome anyone willing to be shaped by its terms.
The past stays near. The pre-war highway signs, the vault doors, the dam's carved eagles, and the future keeps its distance, as futures prefer to do. Between them, a city writes its promises every evening and tries to keep them until dawn. If sleep comes now, let it come to the sound of the turbines, to the light tap of cards on felt, to the monorail's gentle hiss, to artillery that has gone silent for the night, to distant laughter that means no harm. The dam has listened. The river remembers. The neon hums. For a moment, for exactly as long as a held breath, New Vegas is at peace with its reflection. Chapter 6. After the lights settle, let the strip recede to a comfortable distance in your mind, as if you were looking at it from the ridge above Sloan at the gentle end of evening. Neon softens when it's far away. The desert takes the edge off even the loudest colors. Somewhere a trumpet practices the last, sleepiest note of the night, and Mr. New Vegas's voice turns low and warm, a radio hearth for people who live in the cracks between headlines. This is where quiet history lives, not in the moment of the shout, but in the breath after, when a city decides what to keep. After the day the dam listened, New Vegas learned again the art it came with: continuity. The casinos ironed their uniforms and their stories with equal care. At the tops, a dealer tapped the stack of cards twice before every shuffle and never admitted it was a superstition. At the Ultralux, a maitre d' corrected the angle of a single knife as if the fate of civilization were hidden at 60 degrees. In Gomorrah, a hostess watched the door with a smile that was good at telling the future by the way shoes sounded on tile. The Lucky 38, a lighthouse with its lantern turned inward, remained what it had always been, an address for power pretending to be a building. But even in New Vegas, the interesting work happens off-stage. In Westside, the gardens did something miraculous and ordinary at once. They made another harvest. The pipes coughed, the filters complained, and still the beds went green. Sharecroppers on NCR leases counted rows in soft voices at dawn, every leaf a small truce with a hard land.
In Freeside, the followers smoothed the patient's hair, while the kings settled a fight with words.
The followers' clinic chalked its blackboard with lessons, boiling, filtering, the alchemy by which dirty water becomes a drink and a future becomes slightly less fragile. A teenager learned to patch a suit of leather at the old Mormon fort and discovered in his hands that repair is a kind of prayer. The gunrunner's kiosk coughed out pistols and pride by the same mechanism. A clerk with oil on his cuff taught a customer the difference between a well-cut groove and one that would mislead a bullet, and for a moment they were not vendor and buyer, but craftsmen speaking a fluent language. At the Crimson Caravan, paperwork marched in parallel lines like a patient parade. Routes shifted with the wind of rumor. Guards compared scars and recipes. The ledger grew heavier, and with it the sense that tomorrow could be budgeted for. In Novak, the dinosaur kept its half-silly, half-sacred vigil over the highway. Boone, if he stayed, found that time does not give back, but it sometimes agrees to walk beside you without asking for more tribute. Tourists came for cheap rooms and left with stories about a place where the wind has a certain clean sound between the buildings. At the RepCon test site, a janitor swept a floor most people had given up on and thought about sky in a complicated way. Some of Jason Bright's faithful, if they made their launch, had their names spoken in the town at night like a psalm, half hope, half warning. If they didn't, the room they used still smelled faintly of candle wax and courage. North in Red Rock Canyon, the great cons, when they chose to live, did what their name suggests. They made a decision large enough to be a future. In the version of events that leaves the kindest taste, they went looking for high paths and old trade, teaching their children that bitterness is not a profession. They left behind graffiti on an overpass that the sun faded and the wind finished. And one day, the only people who could read it were the ones who already knew what it said. The Mojave, generous in its way, widened to let them pass. At Nellis, the boomers kept their own counsel and their artillery under tarps, polishing both with equal tenderness. If the bomber slept again in its net of green water, it did so with a story wrapped around it like canvas. If it flew, some nights more than rumble rolled across the lake, memory dressed as thunder. Either way, the children at Nellis learned weights and measures you cannot find in a book. How many seconds the ground steals from a shell's arc. How many heartbeats belong between a switch's click and a motor's kindness. How much silence a dream requires to stay true. When asked to sign on anyone's dotted line, they replied with the politeness of people who have already chosen their horizon. Beneath Hidden Valley, the Brotherhood of Steel adjusted to its reflection. For some, that meant hunkering deeper into doctrines until the walls felt more like absolution than a trap. For others, it meant knocking the dust off words like stewardship and share, as if they were tools rather than talismans. Scribes, as always, wrote because someone must. They recorded the particular rasp an old door makes when a policy changes, and the way air tastes when you argue all morning and then sit in the surface sun for 5 minutes, surprised to remember that warmth exists for everyone. The Strip's three families practiced, as is their faith, the power of performance. The chairman kept the lounge cool even when the desert insisted. They learned to run a casino in straight lines after a period when the lines bent toward one man's plans. Swank favored steadiness. The band favored a bridge you could dance across with your eyes closed. The White Glove Society counted forks and reputations with the same serene arithmetic, leaving fewer rumors lying around for scavengers to pick up. The Omertas, when their louder plans had been pulled up at the root, discovered that profitable boredom is a safer friend than exciting disaster. They flirted with legitimacy the way a cat flirts with a sunbeam, cautiously while pretending not to care. In the neighborhoods that sketched the Strip's silhouette, North Vegas, Westside, Freeside, people found that the new arrangement, whoever authored it, came to them as small mercies. A broken pump was fixed sooner because someone put their name on it. A gate guard remembered a face not because of a bribe, but because of a favor traded the week before. The followers sent a nurse to check on a family with coughs and stayed long enough to help mend a window, because mended windows keep medicine inside better than broken ones do. The Kings opened the school auditorium for nights when a monsoon punched rain through roofs, cots in rows, soup in pots, music afterward. If the NCR still maintained posts nearby, their patrols learned the names of dogs. If they had gone, their remnants in the city, the Rangers in their star badges, became lanterns rather than searchlights. At Helios 1, the mirrors found a rhythm. Engineers with sunburns made jokes about worship, and then, when no one was listening, confessed to a kind of reverence. The tower learned to choose generosity over spectacle, unless the day required a reminder that light can also be a border. A tired technician wrote, "Do no harm," in the corner of a chalkboard, and never erased it because smudges have their own dignity. Mr. House, if he remained, managed the city with fewer speeches than people expected, and more memos than most noticed. The Securitrons stayed polite and omnipresent, a civic smile that could tighten when necessary. Contracts were written that kept the Strip's lights funded and the sharecropper fields watered. The price of power was the price of power. People adjusted. If Mr. House did not remain, the face on the screens belonged to Yes Man, or to an arrangement that refused to have a face. The machines enforced rules drafted in back rooms that smelled of coffee and compromise. Independent did not mean alone. It meant a braid. Kings and followers and merchants and tribes, each with their fibers and frays, twisted around a center that held because it was made of many hands. A city is a rope across a chasm. You do not ask which single strand keeps you from falling. And the NCR? Whether victor, partner, or neighbor, it learned what old maps already knew. You cannot own a river by occupying its bank. The dam can be defended, and often should be, but the value of water is not in the flag that snaps above it. It is in the fields that trust it. Rangers along the lake traded radio codes for recipes. Quartermasters counted fewer cartridges and more shovels. In some seasons, brass polished the memorial at Boulder City until the sun read the names aloud again. In other seasons, fewer buses rolled out of McCarran, and the airport learned to echo quite differently at night. Across the Colorado, the Legion remained a weight on the horizon, whether diminished or simply patient. Its camps were geometry that wind respects because wind loves clean edges. Wherever the East held ground, people learned to carry both obedience and a private set of jokes. Where it withdrew, silence did not rush in to take its place. Something more awkward did. Choice, with its clumsy angles and blessings. Legate Linnaeus became a rumor you could taste in the back of your throat, even if he never walked the western bank again. Some of the men who had marched under bull banners turned their discipline into harvest and found that seeds answer to the same voice as orders if you are faithful to the schedule. Through all this, the courier's legend organized itself the way dust organizes in a sunbeam. Slowly, persistently, beautifully, if you happen to be in the right angle. People remembered a checkered suit and a shovel, or they remembered a second chance in Good Springs, and a word carried between armed camps that arrived unshot. They remembered a showman in a tower arguing probabilities, and a robot that could not stop saying yes. They remembered a bridge where two armies explained themselves, and a visitor center where a general's posture changed. They remembered that somebody once brought them medicine, or justice, or the right kind of silence. The Mojave loves a story that lets the listener also be brave for a moment. The courier's tale is that kind. Some say the courier walked north along the 95 until the billboards ran out and the mountains unrolled like a map with no labels. Some say they followed the long 15 east, chasing a horizon that does not like being caught. Others swear a figure with a tired hat stood on the catwalks at Helios 1 at dawn and looked like a question, thinking of an answer. Quiet history does not insist. It nods and says, yes, perhaps, and adds, they left the place better than they found it, which is almost the only measure that matters when the world is new and older than you at once. Years in the Mojave do not stack. They braid. A season of wind tightens bolts nobody thought to check. A good monsoon remembers a field with affectionate violence. A summer of gamblers pays a winter of repairs. The strip's paint fades and is redone in the same color so that everyone can pretend it never dulled. Once in a great while, a Securitron's recorded voice glitches into something like a chuckle. Once in a greater while, a child in Freeside speaks a sentence with a grammar book's confidence, and the whole room is quiet for a heartbeat, the way people are quiet at a miracle they have built with their own calloused hands. If you squint at midnight from the ridge above the valley, you can line up the old and the new in a single gaze. The dam's dark geometry, the lake like a coin someone dropped and never recovered, the river patient as a saint, the strip's crown audacious and vulnerable, Freeside's tenderness, Westside's stubborn green. You can, if you have walked the Mojave's small roads, hear the sound each place makes when it is content. The dam hums, the casinos murmur, the neighborhoods breathe, even the wastes, the wide nowhere between towns, have their own lullaby. Wind on Joshua trees, Brahmin bells, a rail car sighing once before sleep. It is almost time to rest. Before you do, take inventory the way the followers do at night, with pencils worn to friendly nubs. The city survived. It learned again that survival is not a single decision, but 1,000 small ones applied in the same direction. The Strip remains a stage where people try on versions of themselves. The Mojave remains a classroom with no walls. The river keeps moving because that is its whole doctrine. The machines keep working because someone loves them enough to keep them honest. The people, tribes, citizens, outcasts, gamblers, rangers, merchants, dreamers. Keep making and unmaking promises, and then stubbornly keeping more of them than anyone predicted. Now let the lights of New Vegas dim in your mind to that last ember that warms a room after a fire has finished its good work. Hear the cards fall like gentle rain. Hear the turbines edit the night into a softer paragraph. Hear the monorail's distant hush, the soft laughter of a table that is ending well, the click of a lock, not because of fear, but because the day belongs to sleep now. Somewhere on the strip, a marquee goes dark, one letter at a time. Somewhere on the lake, a fish makes a ring on the surface and then forgets it. Somewhere in Freeside, a child rolls over and drops a toy that was once a piece of a machine that powered a city that refused to die. Good night, Mojave. Good night, New Vegas, that is old and young at once. Keep your water, keep your bargains, keep your lights. We will wake and find you again where we left you, patient, irreducible, and, when we are quiet enough, kind.